Good morning. Thanks, Steve. How you doing? I recognize a few faces out there. I was invited to give this pioneer talk, and I'm glad to be considered one. As Steve just said, I am a Canadian, so I must absolutely start with an apology. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure I really consider myself an SRI pioneer. I think I just hung around enough at this conference to have been invited and to be considered one, and I'm thankful for that. And it got me to thinking, what really makes an SRI pioneer? But before I get to that, I want to start with this. George Gay. Now, George is the personification of what makes an SRI pioneer. He's a selfless leader in ways big and small. He's a driving force behind many initiatives, including this conference, where many untold thousands of people have come, learned a lot, been inspired, and connected with others. George and his co-conspirators also brought us FAFN. Now, if you've been around long enough, you will also know that George gave us something else, something very precious: permission to cry at a conference. I learned that from you, George, and fair warning, I may just cry this morning. Why? Well, recently I wrote this book. It's called Invest Like You Give a Damn. And to write it, I had to look back into history and tell the story of SRI, at least from my perspective. And because it's pretty much all I've done in the craziest places of the world for the last 35 years, it was a personal, sometimes emotional reflection. Now, I promised Steve, I said, Steve, I won't talk about my book, but I have to just a little bit, because when the publisher asked me to write the book, who was the first person I turned to? Well, that was Steve, my very first interview. See, for anybody who knows Steve, not much escapes his notice in SRI. And he was actually the very first SRI professional I met way back in Bethesda long, long ago. And so obviously I turned to him when I started writing my book. Now, Peter Kinder was the second SRI professional that I actually met, and he headlined this conference we put on, the biggest one in Canada at the time. It was in Toronto, and he shows up in Toronto with this big, huge parka. It was only November. We were in our shorts and t-shirts to meet him at the airport. But Peter, like all SRI pioneers, he adapted. SRI adapts. It adapts to consumer trends, to investment trends, technological trends, governance trends, and to governments coming and, oh please, going. Peter's quite a guy. He wrote the Ethical Investment Almanac in, 1992 or something like that? For goodness sakes. It was historic at the time. It made us feel like we were part of something big, something important. That's what SRI pioneers seem to do. They bring a big crowd of people to do big, important things. Sherry Berenbach, our dear departed friend, she did that. She did the impossible, pursuing her craft with unmatched love, compassion, and passion. She inspired hundreds of millions of dollars of what can be at the time considered improbable impact investments. George, you're shaking your head. We all know that. She left us a legacy of untold riches, improving the lives of countless thousands in America and overseas. Oops. Back to Peter. That's not Peter. Back to Peter. We'd go see Peter every year in Boston. Actually, it was just an excuse to go see the Beanpot hockey tournament. We're Canadians, eh? That's when we met the cabinets, those 50 or so great green, gray, ex-combat unit filing cabinets stuffed full with papers on SRI companies and all that stuff. They literally warped the floorboards at KLD's original office in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's when that SRI was analog. Now Bob, who you've already seen, he used to come along. It's just when we were founding the SIO, the Social Investment Organization back in Canada. It's now the Responsible Investors Association of Canada. Bob's currently Vice President of NEI Investments. His unwavering lifetime commitment to make SRI bigger and better has had a monumental impact in Canada and beyond. It was about the same time Michael Jancy started what was become Sustainalytics, the SRI analytical firm. I think I can say that safely now that Peter has successfully retired. Personally, I thought Mike was nuts. An SRI data service in Canada in 1991? What was he thinking? But anybody who knows Mike won't be surprised at his success. Talk about a true SRI pioneer. From analog to digital, from based in Canada to providing services in the United States, then North America, then to global. What an accomplishment. Now, many might be tempted to say that data is dull. Not me. It's the bedrock of SRI. And I admire the SRI data folk who think it's unconscionable to theorize without data, judge without facts, an almost seemingly naive philosophy given U.S. media and politics today. But if you want to talk SRI analytics, you can't avoid talking about this man, Lloyd Kurtz, who for 22 years or more, with many others, has managed the Motzkovitz Prize. If persistence and dedication has a middle name, I'm betting on Lloyd. Why, Lloyd and his crowd are about the only ones that can make an SRI meta-profitability study sound like exciting weekend reading. And the Motzkovitz Prize, well, that's hard-ass SRI pioneer. I think we must all agree that the research for that prize has shown time and time again that SRI pays. But it's not just data and analytics that makes SRI roll. At the end of the day, nothing is, and Amy Dominy will tell you that it's all about the movement. See, we used to organize this ultra-secret gathering in Mexico every year, a cabal, apparently, of SRI professionals, called the Morelos Forum, where we sat around drinking tequila, yes, for a few days each winter, trying to figure out the big things holding back SRI. Amy would weave institutional, organizational, government, regulatory, popular culture, media, put them all together to tell us what was important, what was necessary, and what was possible. One year, she started going on about slow this and slow that, and if it was anybody else, we would have been thinking she was getting ready to retire, but turns out she was just down with slow, or integrating emerging slow food and slow money movements into SRI. She knew sustainable economics had to be about the things that we value and not growth through things we just don't need. Inspired by this, in my book, I assert the 70,007% SRI sustainability formula. Now, we all know people who make about $70,000 a year are happier than the rest of us. We also know since the 1950s, the DSI has averaged around 7%. So why not slow down? Why not be happy? And why not expect only 7% from our companies? They'd likely make that more often than not if that's what we asked for. Well, we didn't always agree on everything at the Morelos Forum. Figuring out the world's problems isn't easy, right? Well, amid all the crazy debates, Frank Coleman, Christian Brothers, he would sit quietly at the back with an amused smile on his face until finally, calmly, he would stand up, and he's quite tall, step in, separate the combatants, sometimes by our ears, and get us to what was important. Like so many true SRI pioneers, Frank could find consensus in a forest of difficult. Consensus is nice, we used to say, but we also like disruption, and SRI is full of those kinds of folks, rebel pioneers, daring to think the unimaginable and then just going out and doing it. Dave Berg, Brenda Plant, Ricardo Bagnon, so many others, some you've heard of, some you haven't. And what about this gentleman, Eric Steedman, rebel extraordinaire? After a couple days of vexing, frustrating, getting nowhere conversations on why so many retail investors didn't invest sustainably despite their values, out of nowhere, Eric jumps up and says, "Smash TVs!" Of course, Eric was referring less to the medium than the popular culture. It's as Betsy Zeitman used to say, material hyper-consumerism is killing us. Now, Betsy was one of the early impact investors, and she was right. Incessant overconsumption of stuff made unsustainably. It's like junk food. Makes us lethargic, gives us poor health, leads to lazy thinking, and gives us very poor role models. Of course, social media is just amplifying that 10,000-fold, convincing us to convert desires to needs, and needs to the next thing we absolutely must have that really doesn't keep us happy for that long. But it's not all bad, social media. Take Heather White, who dedicated much of her life to improving the lives of workers in supply chains overseas. She and Lin Zhang recently produced the insanely good documentary Complicit. If you haven't seen it, please go find it. Taking on Apple's supply chain, uncovering all the nasty that goes into making our cell phones. It's an important story of health and workers' rights in China. And we need stories like this. We need SRI storytellers like John Elkington, Eugene Ellman, Oliver Black, Cliff Feigenbaum, and many, many others around the world, pioneers in SRI communications, because let's face it, this is not an easy thing to explain to people. And one of the hardest and maybe one of the most important stories to tell is that about shareholder activism. A woman that I interviewed for my book, Randy, she told me straight up, getting 10% of shareholders to vote on a resolution to get a company to disclose data, uncover their human rights impacts, well, that just doesn't pass the cocktail party chatter test, Mark. It's dull. Oh, but Randy has never met Shelley Alpern of Ceres or X of Clean Yield. Talk to her or any one of the other proxy warriors, and all you want to do is start throwing dead salmons about at corporate AGMs. I know, Steve. I've seen you do it for 25 years. But it's not just the investment professionals who make SRI rules. When I wrote my book, I talked to 50 investors. Talk about an education. One of my favorite quotes was from Lauren from San Francisco, and she said to her vanilla advisor, she said flat out, I don't want a world with guns, with cigarettes, or abuse people, and if you don't get that crap out of my portfolio right now, I'm not wasting another second with you. Now that is a pioneer. Wow, we've come a long way. $8 trillion in SRI. Now I know that's an enormous amount, but it's not enough. And that number comes to us via US SIF, a great organization, a pioneering organization. But I'm scared about how we consume and produce with so little regard to the consequences. I feel positive about energy, but our assault on biodiversity, I don't know about you, but does it feel right that we're losing 4 to 5 species a day? And when I think about this, I get kind of depressed, and when I get depressed, I think WWMLPF. What would Michael Lent and Patricia Farrar do? Rebels with patience at Varus Wealth. Both of them know which side specifically of history we need to land on. They have a true compass, and that is an attribute shared by other SRI pioneers. So, back to my question, and in conclusion, what makes an SRI pioneer? What makes inspiring rebels, storytellers, analysts, investment companies, and organizations and movement makers? What makes them what drives them to do the big, important, seemingly impossible thing? What makes these selfless, passionate, dedicated, dauntless, perceptive, unwavering, obsessive, courageous heroes? Are they more connected to Mother Earth than the rest of us? Have they got improbable levels of empathy for communities and people? Some super karma from past lives? What makes anyone want to give like they do and invest like they give a damn? Well, I don't know, but whatever the cause, I have been privileged and honored to have known so many SRI pioneers. Still, it's a battle, and we're in, and let's not kid ourselves, it's a battle, and it's far from over. So look to your left. Look to your right. If I'm a pioneer, we're all pioneers. And we're pioneers in a century that by design or disaster will be the sustainable century. So thank you. And may the goddesses and gods, great and small, bless us pioneers, one and all. Thank you.